Throughout World War II, to resist and defy the German occupation inside different countries was brave but incredibly dangerous. Those who were suspected of being involved in resistance groups were often rounded up and imprisoned before being tortured badly for a period of time. Most resistance fighters never gave over intelligence or information to their enemy, and for this they were sentenced to death and were executed for the crimes against the German forces. The Germans even executed teenagers, for example Lepa Radic, a teenage girl who was dragged out in front of a crowd and was executed by being strung up from a tree, despite the fact she would have been spared if she gave over information. But within France, the resistance there, in collaboration with the Allies, would help liberate the nation. But in the years before, the German army and SS dealt with resistors in a series of brutal executions. One of the youngest to be executed inside of France was Henri Fertet, who was at the age of just 16 executed for being involved in the French resistance. But what is the story of his death? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Henri Claude Fertet was born on the 27th of October 1926 inside of Selancourt in France, and his parents were both school teachers. He was named after his father and had a younger brother, and by all accounts, Henri had a very normal upbringing in the post-First World War France. When he had finished his primary schooling, he left his hometown in 1937 to attend a different school, and he was said to have been a very intelligent and passionate student, who in particular loved history and archaeological studies. But at the time in Europe, there was a growing cloud of Nazism that was beginning to sweep into different lands. Adolf Hitler was quite clearly preparing and building his army up for the Second World War, and he was desperate to take more lands and nations to create further living space for the German people. He believed in restoring German pride, and he saw a European conflict as the perfect way to pick up his nation. But he would choose to take nations such as Poland and Czechoslovakia, very well knowing that these countries were allied to other nations. In particular, Poland was allied to the British and the French, and as the war began for the Polish, the British and French also declared war following the German invasion. The French, being a neighbouring nation and country to Germany, were immediately in danger, and the assault on the nation by the Wehrmacht and by Hitler's forces was ruthless and brutal. The Battle of France resulted in the huge capitulation of the French forces, and by using blitzkrieg tactics, the British and French were forced back to the shores of Dunkirk. France was plunged under a very strict and tough occupation, and the persecution laws instigated in Germany were also brought across and imposed, and people simply disappeared, being sent to concentration camps. But there were also a number of strict laws and rules brought in, such as curfews, to limit people's freedoms. From the occupation emerged a number of resistance groups and cells, and Henri Fertet joined one of these when he was just 15 years old. He joined a resistance group in Larnac, which was led by a 22-year-old farmer. The group then became part of the FTP, the armed resistance which was created by the French communists. Henri got involved in a number of different missions, and the group launched 31 operations in total until July 1943. Henri was involved in at least 3 of them. This included, on the 16th of April 1943, an evening attack under the cover of darkness on an explosive depot at Fort Montcalm, which was sabotaged and blown up. Then on the 7th of May, he was involved in the destruction of electricity pylons, and then, on the 12th of June, he and a fellow resistor, Marcel Redden, carried out an attack on a German customs officer. They stole this man's weapon, uniform and papers, and Henri shot and killed the officer, but they did not manage to steal the documents, as they were interrupted during this. But the Germans were on to the resistance cell, and in July 1943, many of them were executed. In the evening of the 2nd of July 1943, Henri Fertet was arrested at his family home, and he was taken into German custody. He was then taken to prison, and was battered and beaten inside of solitary confinement, and he was also heavily tortured for information. In September 1943, Henri was one of 23 prisoners who were taken before the German military court, accused of resistance and in defiance of the occupation. The trial lasted 4 days, but 17 of the prisoners were sentenced to death. Henri Fertet was the youngest to be condemned by the Germans. But there was an issue, as under German law, no one younger than 18 years old could be technically sentenced to death, only under exceptional circumstances. The execution of Henri Fertet and another boy who was 17 was said to have been under these exceptional circumstances, and despite appeals being launched, the execution of the 16-year-old went ahead. Henri wrote one final letter to his parents before his execution. In this he wrote, "You cannot know how I have suffered morally in my cell, how I have suffered from seeing you no more, from feeling only, from afar, your tender solitude. During these 87 days of imprisonment, I die for my country. I want a free France and a happy people, not a proud France, first nation of the world, but a hard-working, industrious and honest France. Let the French be happy, that's the whole point. In life one must know how to find and keep happiness. The soldiers are coming for me. I cannot delay. My handwriting may be shaky, but that is because I only have a stub of a pencil. I have no fear of death. My conscience is completely clear. Papa, I beg you, I pray reflect that if I die, it is for my own good. What death could be more honourable for me? I die voluntarily for my country. We will meet again soon, all four, soon to heaven. What is 100 years? Mamma, remember, and these avengers will have a new defenders, who after their death will have successors. Farewell, death calls me. I will refuse a blindfold. I will not be bound. I embrace you all. It is hard when one must die. 1,000 kisses. Long live France. One condemned to death at the age of 16. At dawn on the 26th of September 1943, Henri Fertet, along with 15 other men, were informed that their appeals for clemency had been rejected. At roughly 4:30 that morning, they were taken to the citadel of Besançon, and they were then taken out into groups of 4. There was a firing range which was being staffed by German executioners, armed with their rifles, and Henri, along with 3 others, were taken out in a group to face the executioners. The commander in charge of the firing squad offered the men a blindfold, and they all refused, choosing to stare at the men who would take their lives, and then the order to ready was given. The men stood with their arms behind their backs, and they were secured to stakes at the end of the firing range, but when the German forces shot into them, the men, including the 16-year-old Henri Fertet, screamed "Vive la France!" He was then buried in a nearby cemetery, and people flocked to his grave and laid flowers on it. After the war, Henri's body was exhumed and cremated. Henri Fertet was one of the youngest people to be executed by the German army during World War II. He was someone who was involved in the resistance attacks upon the German army, and he would for his actions face the ultimate punishment. He went to his death bravely, and his final letter to his parents was harrowing and heartbreaking. He was one of many who were condemned for their actions, with his specific resistance cell, and stood alongside 3 other resistors and men. He was ruthlessly shot and dispatched by the German firing squad. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.